Welcome to the ISSA webinar for November 17th, Cloud Security, Locking Down the Unintended Exposure of Sensitive Data. I'd like to thank you all for joining us today. Let us also thank RedSeal for their generous support of the presentation. If you are not yet a member of ISSA International, please visit issa.org to learn more about the benefits of membership and join us. I'd like to encourage you to ask questions of our speakers today. To ask a question, simply type your question in the questions area of your screen. What we're going to do is we're going to collect all the questions, and they'll be answered both throughout the presentation and during the open Q&A that follows. I'd also like to encourage you to share insights you hear on social media using the hashtag you'll see on the bottom right corner of your slides. After the event today, a recorded version of the webcast will be available on the ISSA web conference page. You're also going to be given the opportunity to print a viewing certificate on the webcast page that you can submit for continuing education credits, such as CPE and CEUs in accordance with the various certifying bodies. I am pleased to introduce today's moderator, Kurt Van Etten, Chief Product Officer at RedSeal. Kurt joined RedSeal in August of 2015. Prior to RedSeal, Kurt was Director of Product Management for Symantec's data center security offerings. He previously served as the Director of Risk Product Management at PayPal, Director of Information Security Programs at eBay, and as an officer in the United States Marine Corps. Kurt, thank you for your service. Kurt holds an MBA from the Kellogg School at Northwestern University, a master's in engineering management from Northwestern University, and a BS from the United States Naval Academy. Kurt, please begin the conference and introduce our guests.
Thank you, Pam. Certainly glad to be here. We've got a pretty noteworthy panel here today. We're very fortunate to have Warner Moore, who's the founder of Gamma Force, with us. He has a very extensive security background, particularly in the startup area. And Warner, I'd like to give you the opportunity to introduce yourself.
Thanks, Kurt. Thanks, Pam. It's my pleasure to be here today with such an esteemed panel. My background's been building security and technology teams across industries. I've built over 7 security programs in my career and currently serve as CISO for multiple companies. Super excited to talk about cloud security today, and that's among my favorite topics. Thanks.
Awesome. Thanks, Warner. Certainly glad to have you. Next, I'd like to introduce Jonas Uzon. Jonas joins us from Amazon Web Services. And I've worked with Jonas in the past, and he's been very helpful in RedSeal on our SaaS journey. So Jonas, would you like to say a few words about yourself?
Absolutely. Thank you for inviting me, Kurt and Pam. Indeed happy to join this the team. A few words about myself. Currently, I'm a senior solutions architect with AWS. And when I joined AWS, I basically came from the legacy data centers, being a systems engineer, an instructor, a storage engineer, a security consultant. So coming with a lot of background from the traditional way of running data centers to AWS was quite an amazing road for me. Now, what I do enjoy today is helping customers transition to the cloud and help them grow in the cloud. And I see myself as privileged to help them do it also in a secure way, being passionate about security. So again, thank you for having me on this webinar.
Great, thanks, Jonas. And finally, we have John Weld. John is the Vice President of Engineering at RedSeal. He has extensive SaaS experience as well, coming to us from Balbec. So John, you'd like to say a few words about yourself?
Yes, thanks, Kurt, and welcome everybody to the webinar. Yeah, I've been in the software business more years than I care to remember, but more specifically over 15 years in the security space, not only leading product development for security products for enterprises and federal agencies, but also as a security practitioner, typically running the operations side of cloud services, but also corporate IT as well. So I've set up quite a few security programs over the years. Thank you.
Awesome. So you can see we have a very extensive and very relevant background where people have made this transition to the cloud. So we're pretty excited about it. So first, we'd like to start with a poll and just get a feel for the audience. We'd be curious how many people are pure cloud. They don't have a data center. They're just using cloud service providers and SaaS solutions. Are you 100% on-premise and looking to move to a cloud service provider? Or are you multi-cloud and on-premise? So you're using more than one cloud service provider and you're also hybrid. So to encourage everyone to take that poll. Okay, so as we're doing that, we'd like to just frame the problem statement to give some context to the rest of the webinar. What we're seeing in the industry, right, is cloud security is pretty disruptive and challenging, especially from a security perspective. And here's some research that was done asking people, what are challenges inhibiting your ability to be more proactive in their approach to cloud security? And the answer is the complexity of the cloud environments. In our customer base, they tend to be multi-cloud. They also tend to be hybrid. There's not a whole lot of standardization across the cloud service providers, which we'll talk about. And it's really difficult to get the visibility, to understand the security controls, how to implement the security controls, and how to validate those security controls. And what is this leading to? The complexity is leading to breaches. In particular, the complexity is leading to misconfigurations. And as controls historically were done by maybe the network security team or security professionals, those are pushed in a cloud environment often to the application developers, and things are being misconfigured, things are being left exposed unintentionally to the internet and other untrusted parts of your network. And people are very aware of this. So people in the industry is aware that 93% are highly concerned about misconfigurations and the impact of those misconfigurations. So Gartner's been very vocal on this issue. They did some analysis of the trend of cloud misconfigurations and how these are leading to breaches or potential breaches. And they made a very bold statement. They said through 2023, 99% of cloud security failures will actually be the customer's fault, right? And this is an attacker's dream. I don't even really need to write phishing emails anymore. I can just scan your perimeter, look for things that are exposed, and get into your network this way. And so this is a top of mind, a major concern in the industry, and we're going to talk about in the rest of the webinar.
Kurt, I'm going to interrupt for just a minute. Do you want me to give you the results of that poll?
Sure, we can go ahead and bring those up now.
Okay, so I can't really bring them up, but we did have 54 people respond, which is fantastic. 22% responded with all cloud, 7% responded all on-premise, and 70% responded multi-cloud and on-premise.
Thank you, Pam. Very, very consistent with what I expected. As I said, in our from a RedSeal perspective, that's definitely what we see. The majority of customers are multi-cloud and hybrid, and that's actually a good lead into this slide. And I'm going to try to represent what we hear from our customer base. And so we deal a lot with companies that have strong networking security teams that are in the transition to the cloud or in the process. And they typically tell this kind of a story where, hey, I'm used to being in control of network security. If you're an application developer and you want to open up something in the network, you write me a ticket in ServiceNow or Jira. I will review that. I'll go through the change review process. I will make the change myself and I will validate that change. And I have full visibility and I have full control. And what am I concerned about? I'm concerned about these two questions. I want to make sure that things aren't intentionally exposed to the internet. And I also want to make sure that the segmentation policies are not violated. We're not violating any mandates like PCI or just our own organizational policies. And somewhere along the line, someone said, hey, we're moving to the cloud and we're moving to Amazon Web Services. And they said, by the way you do networking there is you use VPCs and you use NACLs and you use security groups, and there's virtual devices like internet gateways and transit gateways, and there's direct connect VPNs. And the security teams are like, I don't know what that is. I'm an expert in my Cisco or Palo Alto or Fortinet firewall. And so they scramble to kind of learn these things and how to implement them. And they're quite shocked often that they're not the ones that are implemented, that all these things are implemented by the DevOps teams. And then someone comes along and says, well, we don't want to have vendor lock-in. We want to have a multi-cloud situation. So we're also going to use Azure or OCI or Google Cloud in this case. And they have similar things like VPCs and security groups, but they're a little bit different. They have a natting. They have a thing called a cloud router that Amazon doesn't have it. They call it something different. And the complexity is even more confusing. And then people come along and say, hey, by the way, it's so cool, we're using containers now. And in Kubernetes, you can also put networking policies in place, and you can write rules from pod to pod and pod to namespace and IP blocks. And isn't that great? And the security teams are just completely lost. We had two customers that said they went to their management and said, we can't keep up with this. And the answer was take a class. And their answer was like, well, which class? The AWS class, the Google Cloud class, the EKS class, the AKS class. It's just too much, too fast for them to absorb. And they don't have the visibility. They're very nervous, right? Because of lack of visibility, they're not implementing it. They don't really have good tools to validate things as they're being implemented. And then they feel emotionally that, hey, if a breach happens, the finger is going to be pointed at them, but they don't have the tools to do this job. One reaction to this that we've seen is certainly with hybrid customers is the use of third-party firewalls and load balancers because they're comfortable with those. And so they'll deploy their on-prem firewall. They'll also deploy the virtual of that inside an Amazon VPC, for example. So this is routinely the story that we hear from our customer base. So with that, let's talk about that and hear from the panel. So we've had this massive migration. It's been accelerated by the pandemic. Different organizations, different cloud service providers has taken different approaches to security. So what do you think is the strength and weaknesses of this approach? And maybe Jonas, you can start us off with telling us how AWS is attacking these concerns with cloud security.
Yeah, thank you, Kurt. So, there are different ways. There are quite different ways that AWS is doing to address that concern. But really, I'm just going to pick maybe one or two that is going to complete maybe what you started. The first way that AWS tackled this is by making security the first priority. We look at it as priority 0, not even 1. So basically, for any solution running on AWS, any service, the first priority for AWS is making sure it has security features and tools around it, or having it integrate with other native security services on AWS. So one way is really looking at it as part of your culture. Security is number one, especially when you mentioned there's so many people in the IT that are now having to manage security and haven't been doing it before, like the developers, application owners, and such. So culture and first priority. The second way that I see AWS tackling it is by making security simple. I think that, again, complete some of the things you talked about the complexity. So by making security simple, and you mentioned security group and NACL, and we have other services to allow you to raise your security posture. By making these approachable and easy to use and simple, we help customers adopt security posture and help them secure their environment better. So I would say making it first priority, And the second thing would be making security as simple as possible in the cloud.
Yeah, excellent. Thanks, Jonas. Warner, you work with a lot of startups that I'm sure are very taking a cloud-first approach. Can you comment on what you're seeing?
Yeah, I've been really impressed by how AWS has been actively investing in security, and not only in features and the various services, but also in specific security tools between things like Security Hub, Inspector, Guard Duty. These are all tools that many of my clients are growing to rely on having a secure cloud posture.
Yeah, excellent. So let's talk a little bit more about this multi-cloud challenges, right? So certainly, if you go to any cloud service provider, you're going to get a suite of native tools, but they're not necessarily consistent, right? The way they're deployed across AWS, Azure, Google, et cetera, and things get really exponentially more complex. So how is the industry trying to address this issue? So maybe we can start from John, from a practitioner point of view, as someone who's standing up a SaaS service.
Yes, thanks, Kurt. So yeah, obviously, there are very different tools and, even very different terminologies, right? So, I've seen this before in my career where I've managed a mainframe team, and they have a lot of difficulty trying to communicate to a Linux team just because the terminology is so different. So if you're a security professional out there, are you expected to learn all of the terminologies of all the different cloud vendors? So for example, understanding what a VPC is within Amazon, or how that relates to a VNet within Azure. And then sometimes you can get surprised by the different implementations. If you're following some best practices for tagging resources to help you in your security journey, and if you lay that all out nicely on AWS, and then you come to find, for example, on Azure, they don't support tagging on subnets. So what are you to do? And then we're also seeing a lot of the different levels of maturity in these native tools that are provided by the cloud vendors. And pretty much all of the cloud vendors support benchmarks like CIS, but perhaps on different versions, right? AWS currently supports CIS 1.2, where the latest is 1.4. So as a security professional, where does that leave you? What we need is a set of tools from third parties and open source tools that can provide you a very unified view across all of your cloud environments and also your on-premise environments, not only focused on the cloud, but also between clouds. I think that's where the industry is headed, and the goal of cloud security posture management.
Yeah. So Warner, you deal with multiple customers, and can you talk a little bit from a strategic perspective, what an organization needs to do to when they decide they're going to go to a multi-cloud environment?
I think there's a lot of value in taking that approach. I find a lot of people tend to vacillate between extremes, but don't necessarily weigh what it means to truly be multi-cloud. Having a multi-cloud environment takes above average engineering skills and frankly, much longer to execute. If you're building a new cloud platform from scratch, you're not going to spin it up overnight if it's multi-cloud. Have to be conscious about tool selection, Terraform versus CloudFormation, for example. You can't just assume that your orchestration is going to be compatible across the platforms. Actually making active engineering decisions as part of that build-out. I do believe that there's a lot of value in a cloud-agnostic approach, but the organization really has to have the patience and the willingness to invest. It's something that can't happen overnight.
Yeah. Do you feel that security has a seat at that table when those decisions are made? When we decide to go multi-cloud, or is it driven from a financial perspective or a CIO perspective? What's been your experience with that?
I think a lot of more modern technology organizations have more security capabilities by default. If talk you to a cloud engineer, they're more likely to know how guard duty works, as opposed to, say, an old school systems engineer who may or may not know what a FIM is, file integrity monitor. So there is value there. Security, I think this is a challenge universally and perhaps not unique to cloud. Building security into the organization as a whole with buy-in from the CEO to the board, all the way to the call center staff is key. And be it a traditional infrastructure shop or a cloud shop, that's non-negotiable to have success with the security program.
Yeah, I think that's critical. Yeah, go ahead, John.
Yeah, I also think that the security teams get surprised, right? If you have a larger organization, it's so easy. If your strategic direction is Azure, it's so easy for a department on a corporate credit card just to spin up an Amazon account and deploy within Amazon, and then you have to react, right? You have to have that visibility, and you have to react.
So maybe just to maybe resonate what Warner was saying, from an AWS perspective, the way when I talk to customers about adopting a multi-cloud strategy or an initiative to do so, I really want the customer to think about it and do it from the right reasons, right? Because it will add complexity to the mix. Now, I do see customers doing that and having multi-cloud, and for the right reasons, and it does make a lot of sense. And the way that AWS is looking at it on how we can help maybe negate the risk a little bit and help customers with the complexity is by AWS adopting open source tools and services, right? Like OpenSearch, of course, Kubernetes and such, even object storage, right? Basically adopting and creating services that can actually kind of level the field and allow customers a more easy way to transition between those different cloud vendors and even run their workloads on those different cloud vendors. So that's one of the ways that AWS is trying to help with that complexity.
Yeah, excellent. I do think we're going to see more of these type of attempts at overlay solutions, right? To abstract some of that complexity, and thrilled to see that AWS is helping lead that charge. So let's start a second poll. We're gonna have a poll here trying to gauge the audience for how many people are using the native controls exclusively, and how many are using third-party firewalls and other types of solutions to do that. So while that poll's going on, maybe from anyone's experience, do you see a difference in market segments or industries of where you tend to see more third-party firewalls as opposed to where you see really pure use of the cloud service provider's native controls?
Yeah, I think a lot of that depends on where you started your journey. I think a lot of the newer companies that are cloud native first, they tend to use a lot of the cloud native tools. I think if you have a larger organization that is making that journey from on-premises to cloud workloads, and you're pulling along your security practitioners, then what we tend to see is a lot of third parties firewalls deployed. Here at RedSeal, as we start our FedRAMP journey and start talking to vendors that can help us, a lot of the vendors that have infrastructure to deploy rely on third-party firewalls as part of their controls for, say, a FedRAMP environment.
Yeah, excellent. I agree. What I tend to see is organizations that have a traditional network security team with expertise in firewalls tend to want to use those in the cloud, and a smaller organization that's going cloud first may be more likely to use the native controls And certainly from a networking security perspective, we've seen AWS, Azure, right, start building their own firewalls as well as other, networking type capabilities such as IDS and IPS. So I think, depending on like your point, John, saying like, depending where they came from is more likely where you're going to see the adoption of third-party firewalls.
If I can maybe add just one note on that.
Sure.
Definitely, I do see, ISVs, and I see products coming into the market where these firewall products are born in the cloud and are cloud native. It makes a lot of sense to use these instead of trying to bring the legacy tools and try to shape them into working within a VPC and so on. It does make life more complicated. And again, going back to the simplicity and trying to help customers, one of the things that we do at AWS, we have the marketplace, right? So this is kind of a very easy way for a customer to just, pick and choose from the marketplace a specific tool, just like, RedSeal has on marketplace security tools. The same way customers just grab and use these native and test them out and check those out. So that's another way for us to, again, help the industry, help the customers adopt the right maybe tools for the mission. Yeah.
Right. Absolutely. Yeah. It's going to be very interesting to see what happens in the industry, right, over the next few years, as certainly your traditional firewall vendors are trying to become cloud. And there's going to be new entrants, right, that are cloud native, multi-cloud. And then, of course, the cloud service providers also providing their own offerings. So I think it's going to be very interesting to see how this plays out over the next few years. Okay. So Pam, can we go over the results of the poll?
Absolutely. We had 45 folks respond. In terms of the first answer, only CSP provided native controls. It was 13%.
Mhm.
Only third-party controls. It was 8%. And the majority answered a combination of native CSP controls and third-party controls with 77%.
Yeah, excellent. Again, that's pretty consistent with what I've seen. I think, again, if you're coming from a legacy background, right, you consider maybe that this is a best in class kind of a solution, and maybe you're going to wait and see as these other entrants into the market give you what you need. And so that's pretty consistent with what we see in our environment. So thank you for that, and thank you for everyone for answering the poll. So let's talk about, we've talked about this, really a new attack surface, new environment, new technology, some other research here showing, that 2/3 of respondents say it's really difficult just to keep up with the security best practices. The attack surface changed. The environment is more dynamic, has a lot more entropy with it, and really new technology requires distinctly different expertise. As you're learning all this cloud infrastructure, you're learning new things like how to secure serverless. You have infrastructure code that you want to validate. So, what are we seeing in the challenges in finding the mix of these skill sets and how organizations are handling this? So maybe let's start with Warner. What are you seeing?
I love this dialogue around cloud native controls versus, say, traditional firewalls. Coincidentally, I had coffee with a security engineer earlier this week who works for one of the big legacy firewall vendors, and we were kind of debating about it. And this gentleman certainly has an evolving skill set, and he's looking at things from a future forward perspective, how we're building and driving change in the industry. And in security, we still commonly have that traditional infrastructure mindset. And so if we have a security engineer that comes from that background and going into a cloud environment, they're more likely to try and inject a firewall. And I always ask, why? Why do we need that instead of, say, security groups? And more often than not, I don't get a great answer. And That's why finding the right type of skills, the people who have the right experience is key. Cloud native doesn't use the same traditional tactics. In fact, it's in many ways more powerful than we've ever been because we have less physical limitations than we did when we had data centers and infrastructure and networks all over the place. And this more modern approach really takes an engineering mindset as someone who embraces DevOps culture and practices, employing more modern security practices like DevSecOps. We need that engineering skill set, and the bar of skill for someone to take that approach is much higher.
Yeah, absolutely. In our customer base, what we see is the security organization is still pretty centralized, right? That they don't have the staff or B, the skill sets yet to really do DevSecOps in the way it's envisioned, right? That there's a sec person that has some habitual relationships with application teams. And I think this is a big challenge as a huge transition for security organizations. Maybe Jonas, you can talk about some of the things that you see that helps with this issues.
Yeah, just kind of to second what Warner was saying, I totally agree with your comment, Warner, about customers choosing or deciding to try to use legacy and traditional mechanisms sometimes in the cloud. In some cases, it works fairly well or even great, but in many cases, I kind of urge them to look at ways that to secure their infrastructure, ways that are built into the service, built into the cloud platform. Now, to answer the question, maybe looking at it from what customers can do about it, how customers can actually help themselves with that type of complexity that creates that attack surface. I don't want to say one word, but I almost want to say it's one word. It's automation. If I could say, please, to customers, please use more and more automation around event response and around deployment and configuration to reduce the risk of mistakes. Just by doing automation, you reduce the risk of that larger maybe attack surface dramatically. So automation is a key strategy in my mind. And again, if I speak in behalf of AWS, it's a big item for AWS, for an AWS infrastructure. We provide API and SDKs, and we provide ways for you to enable an automated response. For example, if there is a root user logging into the account, if there is an SSH session that's not supposed to be there, you can enable very quickly features within your account, within AWS account, to either send you a text message or an email, or actually run a script like a Lambda script to maybe segregate a specific instance, and so on and so forth. So automation is a big piece, of course, together with DevOps best practices and security best practices, and leveraging the automation, the wealth of automation tools and APIs within your cloud environment. This would be my call for action to customers. Yeah.
Yeah, I totally agree with what Jonas is saying in terms of automation and having that DevSecOps culture. A lot of development organizations are agile, and sometimes people hide behind that agility as an excuse not to worry about security. But as an organization, you really need to make sure that you have a secure development lifecycle where you're thinking about security right from the very, very start of the development process, in your stories, in your roadmaps, and make sure that any change that you make with your automation is following that GitOps model for sure.
If I can just give another quick example, really quickly, in one of your slides, Kurt, you showed native features like security groups and knuckles used in a VPC to secure your network. So, and then the risk of customers raising, where now I have the application owner that is deploying an application, and how do I know is putting the right security group or the right knuckles? And one of those native securities, maybe that Warner was mentioning within AWS, config, right? That's a service that would help you maybe automatically delete or close a security group that somebody just created, automatically, immediately, that somebody just created, which is outside of your compliance rule set, right? You do not want to have a security group, let's say with port 22 open to the world. It will automatically close it down. So again, going to automation, going to native security services, and helping customers do the right thing, but also making sure they are actually following on it. Yeah.
All right, excellent. So let's talk about visibility. So I talked about this in my slide as well, is that security teams feel like they've lost a lot of visibility from an inventory perspective, from ability to implement, from ability to validate their security controls to do it. And so what, that's a big word, but really what do customers want to see? And why do they want to see it? What's most important that, audience should be thinking about? Maybe John, you can tackle this from a practitioner perspective as someone standing up and running a SaaS solution.
Right. Yeah. So obviously having visibility of your inventory is, you have to start there, right? When you're looking at your overall security posture. Not only across all the different clouds you have, but also, from your on-prem to your cloud, right? What does the visibility look like? What controls do I have in place? All of the vendors, as we've talked about, have APIs that allow you to either gather the data or subscribe to changes. But it's usually not quite that easy. So for example, when you create an AWS account, you get a bunch of default VPCs in a lot of different regions. How do you know that those are being used or not? Do you go in and check every single one, all of the 15 to 20 that you get? Or are you looking for some kind of tool that provides you that visibility? And then once you do have the inventory, what's important to you is not each individual item, but what is untrusted that might be exposed to the internet? And that's a surprisingly hard question to answer. We've talked in this presentation quite a bit about third-party firewalls that are deployed. So how do you know from the ingress point into your cloud environment all the way through to that pod or that EC2 instance that that particular resource is exposed to the internet? It's a very hard problem to solve, but we're starting to see products come out that will help for sure to help answer that question.
Yeah, excellent. And I think that we've talked about also cloud native architecture and some visibility that they can provide, and in some ways how it's easier in the cloud than it is on-prem. Maybe Warner, you can talk about that and what you're seeing in your customer base.
Sure thing, Kurt. I love Jonas's one-word answer, automation. I think there's a lot of insight in that. And so if anyone didn't catch that before, reflect on that. Jonas a lot. I do think cloud native environments can have an edge. And when I say cloud native, I mean truly cloud native, and embracing a cloud architecture using modern tools and services. Because we don't have to build all these things with physical limitations. And it's easier to get higher capability security operations with less work. I mean, just think about back in the day, right? And this is true for many of us still, but if we have multiple data centers, infrastructure, network segments, servers, systems, multiple operating systems, having to implement FIM, IDS, IPS, network taps, vulnerability scanning, all these things. I could go on and on, right? Not only do we have to implement them, we have to implement them well and get them tuned and watch them. Now, certainly, that's a similar problem in the cloud, but we don't have those physical limitations, and we can use modern engineering practices to reduce the noise and provide higher value in security operations. And that modern tool set and getting such a high capability, well, we're not talking multi-year initiatives here. We could be talking months, if even that long, for an organization that is building cloud native. I don't think we recognize that a lot.
Yeah, excellent. I definitely agree. There are a lot of things that cloud does that makes certain security operations a lot easier, right? Like you mentioned, if you want to monitor traffic and looking at a physical network and where to put your taps and where to branch it off the IDS, it's anyone that's gone through that knows it's quite cumbersome and really difficult to do, and much easier to do in the cloud. So Jonas, maybe you can talk about what the cloud service providers are doing to help with visibility, not only natively, but how they're helping the industry develop solutions as well.
Yeah, for sure. But before I do that, I want to emphasize that I really love what RedSeal is doing around visibility. I was introduced to your product, your company, maybe a year ago as an ISV at AWS, and I really love the way that you guys are promoting visibility to help customers see the risks they are at and what they can do to resolve things. So just kind of on a personal note. Now, to address the kind of the visibility discussion, and again, going back to what other folks has said, visibility is a major thing. You want to have the visibility you need in order to understand what is going on from a security perspective. And if I can speak on behalf of AWS, what we've been doing to help customers be able to have good visibility is, of course, we provide some tools within the portal, within the AWS, within your AWS account, some tools and services that provide visibility. But when there is any gap, what we provide an API and an SDK. And these APIs and SDKs we provide today for almost all services is allowing third-party companies and customers themselves get their own visibility by utilizing other third-party tools or by utilizing their own custom tools they are building, right? So the answer for that would be from an AWS, and what we do is I think customers should leverage and use the API we provide and the SDKs to let you have as much visibility as you need so you can take action by talking directly to CloudWatch or CloudTrail, or basically talking, like I said, to almost any service within AWS by using those APIs. So this would be how we help with around the visibility discussion.
Yeah, thanks, Jonas. And I'll certainly give AWS a compliment back as we've been standing up our service. AWS team has been really beneficial. And like you said, those APIs are just instrumental to our solution because we want to get access to that quickly and provide our own data enrichment as well as other vendors. And it's really been critical for us. So we're really seeing new categories of solutions come into play, and certainly cloud security posture management has been a big buzzword of late. Gartner defined this term, I believe, late last year. It was defined very broadly and to include, pre-runtime checks, infrastructure code checks, container security, all the way to post-production, checking things at runtime. And it's a pretty hot space. And the goal of CSPM is, find issues with that attack surface, eliminate misconfigurations, have continuous monitoring, and do so. So, the question is, why is this so hot, right? Why is this space so on fire? My point of view on this is, from going back to my previous slide, from someone who's sitting in security that feels that they're behind the 8 ball, they've lost visibility, They've lost abilities to validate things. That these types of solutions gives them something, right? That I can at least go in now, see my inventory. I can start looking at the configuration standards, whether they're industry standards like CIS or my company policy, as you know, as Jonas gave an example, right, where there should be no outbound or 22, for example. It really is addressing both the security need, but also, in my mind, the emotional need of these security teams to understand what's going on in doing this. So certainly, Jonas, you talked about, you know, AWS config, and I know AWS also offers CIS checks as well. So how do you see this compliance space and the CSPM place right now in the industry?
Yeah. So again, I look at it from two different point of view. So first of all, of course, is around best practices. And if you mention CSPM, it's all about there's these core components of CSPM where we sometimes call them flywheel, right? Everyone has its own terminology, but for security, I look at it as making sure you're constantly auditing and monitoring your solutions, you know, providing actionable response to events and findings, talking about automation before, you know, and talking about visibility, and trying to achieve consistent security best practices across your cloud vendors, across the multi-cloud, across your on-premise and your cloud. So these are kind of the core components of CSPM. And from another perspective, the way we in AWS, the way we try to help customers get to that state of mind or culture of CSPM is you as a customer have the ability to run a questionnaire. It's like we call it the well-architected assessment questionnaire. It's within your account, and we ask you a couple of questions around security and other topics like operations, but you can choose just maybe to focus on security. And by asking you these questions, by you answering these questions, you get a report at the end of the day telling you what risks we have identified according to your answers and what you can do about those things. And you don't run it once, you run it every few months. And the reason is because you adopt new services, you adopt new resources, you deploy more resources. So your environment is always changing in the cloud. So we ask you to use that. It's a free service. We ask you to do that. And sometimes we run it with the customers just to kind of help maybe with some of the questions if they need any help. But really helping them answer these questions, see what the risks are, fix those, and run it again after a while. So these are two things I want to promote around the CSPM terminology.
Yeah, excellent. Yeah, so we looked at this space right now. Analysts are telling us, you know, that only about 58% of customers are using CSPM in their stack. Right now, it's a pretty nascent field. Maybe I go to John. John, what's been your take on the CSPM space, and do you think there are gaps in the current industry solutions that will need to be addressed over time?
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, I'm sure a lot of people are looking at this slide wondering why do we have this this house there. You know, the analogy that we like to talk about at RedSeal is that you know, you can check every single brick in a house, but does that necessarily make your house secure? You know, what we're seeing out there is a lot of players in the CSPM space are really focused on inventory and checking the bricks, right? Checking to make sure that you have the right security controls down at, say, the EC2 layer. What a lot of the vendors are missing is that kind of end-to-end view. You know, what is really exposed to the internet and how. You have to follow that path all the way through, from the ingress all the way down through your infrastructure, through the third-party firewalls to your resources. So, as an example, at RedSeal, we've deployed a zero trust solution for our DevOps teams to gain access into our production environment. So, how do I know that's the only way in? Am I going to put security controls to say that you're only allowed to access that zero trust environment from within the corporate VPC? From within the corporate VPN network. So I think that's what's really missing. I think having that true visibility and understanding really what is in your environment and what is exposed as untrusted, I think is a hard problem to solve, and we see a lot of gaps in the current solutions.
Yeah, thanks. That's definitely what we hear from our customer base is they implement these solutions. They're good at the inventory. They're good at checking the bricks, but they're just left confidence, or they feel they're getting a lot of false positives when it comes to, hey, is this thing truly exposed to the internet or not? And they're wrestling with that. And so I think things like that, things about validating your segmentation policies that still exist in the cloud, also is a gap, and will evolve over time to do that. Okay. So we have about 9 minutes left. We'd like to take some questions from the audience. So if you have any questions, please add them to the group. It would start off with one here. Pretty high level question, but what do you believe are the toughest challenges for security teams in a hybrid multi-cloud environment? Anyone want to jump in on that one?
Maybe I can say a few words about that. So the way I see that, with the experience I have with my customers, one of the main things it would be, again, something Warner mentioned before, it's about training and having the right skill set. So always pursuing to learn the new tools, the new technologies that come out, and trying to keep up would be very beneficial for IT, for the IT folks in the company, to kind of keep up and be able to manage these new services and new tools out there. So training would be a big item.
Okay.
Yeah,
Training and skill set. Anyone else?
I echo that and build on that. I had a lot of conversations about this recently with clients, and I find that people often have pretty arbitrary opinions based on what technology they might want to choose. And I always ask them to step back and think about why from a business perspective. So some of these technologies I have a whole lot of trouble hiring for, right? So if you pick a platform and the talent doesn't exist commonly in a highly competitive market, employee market, like technology, well, that's something worth weighing. So the talent factor is a big one, and complexity. Those two things I think are very overlapping. I'll stop there and leave room for others.
Yeah, I think the security staffing shortage has been a problem for probably since security was invented, and I think it's just been exacerbated tremendously by the movement to the cloud and the different types of technologies and architectures, and really it's also a mindset change, right? That you have to. A couple of you already mentioned, right? You need to have like a cloud first mentality, and people are coming in with a legacy point of view, and that has to be adjusted over time as they learn the differences between on-prem architectures and cloud architectures. Okay, so I have a couple more questions coming in. This one's around data and sensitive data and understanding where it is. Contractually, who, the customer or the cloud professional, documents the sensitive data and processes used from cloud to cloud, and who is responsible for the data security status and the reporting of it?
You know, I saw this question come in, and I've been reflecting on it ever since. And I think there's a lot in that. And I found myself wondering what the actual question is. I'd say that if it's your data, you need to be responsible for it. If it's your customer's data that you're shepherding, you need to be responsible for it. So if you do not have contractual commitments in place with vendors and service providers where that data lives, well, ultimately you're responsible, right? That's how I look at responsibility as it relates to data.
Yeah, I would agree, right? It's your data, you're responsible for it, and you need to be able to track that data and have policies around where that data can move, right? And I think this goes to the lack of visibility. I think there's probably a concern here about, well, what if I have some sensitive data in an application that's running in AWS, and now someone decides they want to move it to Azure? How do I know that that data is there and the right controls are in place? So I think it's a tough challenge, but I totally agree with Warner. It's not on the cloud service provider to keep track of your data, right, and determine whether it's sensitive or not.
And Kurt, if I can tie this question and your answer to this question maybe to the beginning of where we started, the beginning of the conversation, where I talked about looking at security as priority one. It has to be your number one priority, especially when we are looking at cloud as something that has kind of democratized, it's very easy to upload your data and move your data in the cloud. Just because it's easy doesn't mean you're not liable to make sure it's safe, right? So being responsible, understanding all the security features that you can enable on a specific service where you have your data, and making sure you check all those guardrails that you can have around your data. This is your responsibility as a customer, as an application owner, as a DevOps engineer, and so on and so forth, right? So take it and make sure it's part of your culture. That's how I would look at it.
Yeah, excellent. I'm gonna try to squeeze in two more questions. So one is using the cloud provider security tools to enforce controls enough, or having a third party validate those security controls preferable than just relying on provider checks? So I'm reading third party validate, maybe some type of pen test or audit, right? Anyone want to take a shot at that?
Yeah, I think again it goes back to, are you single cloud or multi-cloud, right? The challenge is, if you're multi-cloud, are you going to become experts at all of the cloud provider tools for each of the different clouds? You should definitely have third parties validate, particularly as you mentioned, Kurt, from an external pen test perspective. I think that is very important. We do that here at RedSeal, and a lot of compliances such as SOC 2 require you to do that. So I would say definitely have some third-party validation, be it external tools, be it some open source, or be it some pen tests.
Yeah, excellent. Okay, I'll try to get one more here. This is from an auditor perspective. So as an auditor using a security framework like ISO, NIST, PCI, HIPAA, CIS, we look for evidence that right controls are in place for all technologies that support the business. Hybrid cloud organizations have an extremely hard time knowing that if their own security teams should provide the evidence or get what they need in response to an AWS Azure. Companies don't know what to ask for. Does AWS provide security reports, for example, that detail what they're doing and the frequency? So this is an auditor coming in looking for evidence against these controls. Maybe we'll start with Jonas on this one.
Yeah, I'm just going to be quick. At the end of the day, I think that by using a third party, that's kind of like another set of eyes. And I see that very helpful for customers. That would be my quick answer.
Yeah. So I think as you see in the CSPM space, that you'll see more aligning to these frameworks, that you'll be able to go in and say, hey, let me look at your configuration checks that map to CISA or PCI or et cetera. And I think you'll see that extend as the solutions evolve to things like network segmentation policy as well. Okay, so we're out of time. I would like to thank the panel so much for joining. It was a great discussion. So thanks, Warner, Jonas, and John for joining us. And thanks to Pam and ISSA for allowing us to have this conversation today.
And thank you, everyone, for joining us. Again, thank you to RedSeal for their generous support of the presentation. After today's event, a recorded version of the webcast will be available on the ISSA web conference page. You can also print a viewing certificate on this webcast page on Bright Talk that you can submit for continuing education credits. If you have any questions, please contact Member Services at issa.org. You are also invited to join us tomorrow, November 18th at 1 p.m. Eastern Standard Time for our next webinar, where our topic will be Thought on Operationalizing Your Threat Intelligence Capabilities. Thanks again, everybody, for joining us, and have a great rest of your afternoon.